Thank you for joining us. We're here on the occasion of Amin Gulgee's solo exhibition and with curator Adam Fahy-Majeed. We will be speaking about the exhibition and the performance that took place prior to this at the opening. So I'll start with some questions. We can take it in whatever directions we like, whatever arises out of that. But I think the first natural question would be to talk about the larger sort of conceptual frame of the exhibition and what ties the works that we see here together, because there's sort of works that we may have seen in various disparate bodies of work previously, but they have been brought together here. So just, if you guys can speak about the larger sort of framework of the exhibition and thinking about the works on display here.
So the exhibition, Spooky Action at a Distance, is actually an Einstein quote. So it was how he was deriding the idea of quantum entanglement. But nowadays we actually know that quantum entanglement is a thing. It's just a very mysterious new frontier of science. And with that, you have new applications like quantum teleportation. Quantum entanglement means that two particles at their most basic, smallest level that we currently know them at can be correlated no matter how far the physical distance, right? So then, if that is true, then you can also share information between them on an instant level immediately, even if they could be light years away. So this, I found a very interesting frame to consider Amin's 30 years of work, and just to go back through that and see how do these works share their quantum information together. Because if you actually look at it and you go look further into the particles beyond just even the material itself, obviously copper, metal, this is Amin's mode of communication artistically. But beyond that, if you actually look at the forms and where the sources for the forms, you start to see more and more of these connections and more of this information passing on a quantum level. So I mean, probably it would be relevant for you to discuss how you approach that in your practice and in your sculpture making.
Well, that's why one has curators. Because as an artist, you try to be as unconscious about the art production as possible. You really do. And sure, later on you can see certain threads that do interconnect and come up again and develop and grow.
Okay, thank you. So I want to go back to the performance on the opening night. But before that, I want to address a kind of larger question, which is that in your practice, you have two kinds of engagements with performance. One is where you sort of the curated performance happenings or events, and the others are sort of your own performances, which are collaborative, perhaps. So, can you sort of just elaborate on the difference between these two, and that difference for you, or just in general how to perceive those two as separate or not?
Thank you. Yes, there are two sides of it. One, I'm a curator as well, and I curate performance happenings. Let's take this example, for instance. If you remember, me and you curated a performance happening called Dreamscape, which was one of the largest ones of that kind at that time. I think it was 2007, I'll say 7, I love the number 7. Let's just go for 7. Anyway, it can be checked up on. So it happened then. It was a really large performance happening where we had installation and 2014. Okay. I'm in the quantum realm, okay? So going back to it, that was a performance happening, where you have a myriad of, you curate it, you put it together, and how each performance interacts with each other. And there are other people's works there, and you curate them. My own collaborative performance is a paradigm shift. Then it's my work, and it's completely my work, where I'm collaborating with different artists, And I'm aware of the trajectory, and even if I'm not aware, I make myself aware of the trajectory. So the first thing I do when I'm doing a collaborative performance is I'll go through almost everything they've done. I'll say, show me everything. And then something always speaks to me, a part of it that connects with me, and they become part of my collaborative performance, you know. So that for me is the big difference between my own performance work, like for instance, the first time I did a collaborative performance with you, Zarmeene Shah, it was for Washed Upon the Shore. Right here in this gallery. And that's the first time I think I did a collaborative performance. After that, I did one in Paris, This Is Not Your El Dorado, then one in Chicago, Kiss of the Spider Woman, and this is my fourth one. But my very first one started here, and now we're back in this gallery for a collaborative performance.
I mean, this actually, now you were just discussing it, I thought of maybe there's a couple more, actually ones that we've been involved in. I think in a way...
But that's curating. See,
No. Healing 2 was also a sort of a performance that you were involved in, and you...
With different people, but a collaborative performance, you have more than one kind of work happening. With healing, I took it as one work. You know? So collaborative performance is more like a novel with chapters in it. You know, it's a novel with chapters, and as you read one, and then you read the other, and then you read the other, and there's some chapters that are intermittent that sort of connect everything.
Yeah, I know, absolutely, and then adding it just to make it nice and quantum. Adding a fourth kind is actually where you began a lot of your performance work was in actually the fashion world, and so you had, and you actually what I noticed is that in a way the way that people are inhabiting your work at the moment, as in how they're these, as you can see here, you see a helmet. There was 7 helmets in Fairy Tale 72, and other different headgear and costumes made by Amin, and the wearing of this, inhabiting of this sculptural kind of regalia, it brings the object alive, and the Amin is thereby connected through his practice with each of the artists as they go and do these collaborative performances. And that you kind of saw in a different way in this fourth way that we're discussing in his early fashion work. I wasn't around to see that, but I've going through the archives, you very much noticed that.
Thread. So if we are to say there are various iterations of the performance, engagement with performance. So one, let's say, is the standalone, independent performance which doesn't accompany an exhibition, right? And then there is what, most recently for this exhibition, which starts the exhibition in a way, as in almost like a ritual, which ties to your kind of ritualistic methods within performance. So how do you see these, what is the relationship between that performance and this exhibition? What changes between these two modes? So the independent performance and then one that happens with a show.
Interesting question for me. Yes, to activate an exhibition, and I'm an object maker, I make sculpture, I make objects or installation. For me, those are objects too, just together in a larger dimension. It's quite wonderful for me to activate one of these shows with a performative work. Again, I don't literally try to tie the performance into what I'm doing at the moment. There's no conscious connection. But sometimes threads, and later on people can, you think about it, certain sort of threads, certain echoing of the work is in the performance. But what I did separately for this show, which I've never really done before, is I showed my helmets as sculpture, which they're meant to be. They're meant to stand alone as sculpture. And then they were removed, worn, and performed.
I mean, there's not much I can add to that. I think that's in a way, what I like about seeing the helmets then back on display is that if you kind of have seen the activation as well, which obviously I have, you're always called back to that energy, and you can see this is quite, in almost a literal sense, these are people inhabiting Amin's work. And, when you're moving around the space, even as the audience, that's what you're doing. And with the scale and the materiality of the work, it makes it very easy to do that. And that's something that I really appreciate about the work, because, there's a very immersive thing when you have such a physical play of light and shadow. You have the material of the materiality of the metal itself, and when you have these objects that people are also wearing, that just gets kind of accentuated, because you're seeing this person with a metal helmet on, and it's very easy to see the connection.
I'll just add one thing. It's funny. I haven't really thought about this, but it's like conjuring within your own nest. Within your own nest, within your own context. Like I did a performance at Sanat Gallery Q, and it was a group show, so there were other people's works around you. Or one I did with Sarah Paganwala in the sort of like in front of the National Museum in Karachi, and it was in a field. But over here, you are almost surrounded and sort of not protected, but enveloped in your nest.
But this thing of like a trace, that
Yes.
almost a trace of the performance. Right. This is something you guys also did. We spoke about this in terms of Chicago, the show in Chicago as well, right? Like there were objects or traces of that performance left behind. But I want you were talking about the helmets, and I want to kind of go there. Is the helmets you haven't shown them before.
Not a sculpture.
But they are simultaneously kind of defensive and offensive, right? They kind of speak to protection, but also to war and so on and so forth. Is this something you consider a new direction, or are you thinking of this? You have done a kind of armored, ornamental armors, I could say. Ornamental is not the word, but sculptural armor works. Yeah. Do you see this as connected to that body, or are you thinking of these differently now?
It's a continuation. You're right. When I was doing my initial fashion shows, I had a lot of bustiers. They were very militaristic. Now I think more of the protection has come in, the sense of protection. That has developed into the armor. Like there was one work called The Embrace, where the man was sitting up, Faizan Chawla, who's from Napa, and he was sitting up on a stool, and what he needed to do was just embrace himself and just protect himself. And he was protecting himself in this shell, in this cocoon. And yet the helmet Angeline was wearing, she was walking around and anointing people, so sort of breaking into their space. But again, done in a very sort of soft, sort of inviting way. But then, to contrast that, there was Maha, who went around to confront people. Who are you? In Urdu. Why are you here? And only men. Because, over here, most of our spaces are male spaces. So finally, a person was questioning a man, why are you here? So yes, there was.
And again, just to bring it back to the whole framing of the exhibition, this is what I mean about the quantum information. Like, this is work separated by many years now. I mean, it means no spring chicken, right? Yeah. So, three decades of intense practice is quite a lot of stuff in there. When I was doing my thesis, it was at points overwhelming until you have to approach it in this interconnected, like Amin says, it's a continuation. So these things are not separate, they're all intertwined. And I just found it a very nice way to think about it, is that actually they're sharing their quantum information constantly. And every new piece that is made is sharing information with other ones in the web. And, if there's one reverberation in one part of the web, that will continue around the web. And, you can imagine it like a drop of dew on the web. And you have one drop come off, and then the rest of the web vibrates, and something new is produced. So, that's how I've been thinking about him in the last couple of projects that we've worked on together.
Back then, it's funny because I did 3 shows, Alchemy, Solar Singar, and River Dreams of Alexander, and they were on the catwalk format. This is when I used to make jewelry. And I was very much thinking of because like in England, it's only when Elizabeth I came around that women started wearing jewels, jewelry. So it became this sense of power of the woman. Before, only the men wore big jewels, the fine jewels. But in South Asia, we have a very different tradition. Women always have worn jewelry. They've always carried their economic strength on their hands and around their neck. It's who I am powerful. And so I wanted to take that off, rather than jewelry becoming this sort of like chains on you. I wanted it as empowerment, and transform that jewelry into sort of actual bustiers, sort of metallic gear for the woman, sort of powerful, strong, assertive. And that was my sort of take-off point for all of these sort of almost militaristic headgear that make these women wear and march around and, carry spears. And
it's also a comment on fashion, right?
Right.
Of fashion.
Oh yeah, because at that point that was this is the 90s, and it was crazy in Karachi, almost civil war, but there was a lot of energy. This post-military dictatorship, and suddenly this breath of air, and it was a crazy, heady time, and it was really interesting because fashion was so young, so much younger than art. And there was so much experimentation, room for it. It hadn't gotten standardized as it is now, where you have fashion weeks, you have a catwalk. It was so theatrical. So you had all of this leverage to sort of like put forth, anything you wanted to onto the catwalk, and it was okay. And again, it was we had just come out of Zia. And then there were these women who were the models at that time, and they were all quite larger than life. They became personas, and Fifi Harun helped in that. She ran a magazine called Extra, where she would make them into these people, these really important, iconic people and supermodels. And it was so funny because that's how it actually worked. Rather than telling them how to move, I knew exactly, because you'd worked with them again and again, because I'd done a lot of fashion shows with other designers, putting my stuff on. I knew these women, and I knew how they moved. I knew their personality. So you would create things for them, like for Irij or Vanessa Ahmed. You would it would be really custom made according to the character, their personality, and then they would just march them forth.
So that's interesting. Do you still think of personalities or characters, even if fictional, when you are making or like
a mask? No, not anymore. And you know what's kind of strange is that, especially for this show, in Chicago, like what happens is you get people in and they try this and they try that and they try that, and something fits them. And sometimes it's 2 or 3 times they have to try. For this show, what was absolutely odd was they would just put it on, and that was it. The first thing they would put on was the piece they wore. It was like this Excalibur moment, They can draw the sword. And it was quite magic for this particular Fairy Tale 72, was they would just put it on. It's like, no, this is it. There's no need to try anything more. This is yours. They just fit.
No, and just a footnote. I mean, it's also when we're discussing information and connection throughout, a space of time. It's interesting that our lighting director for this was actually one of these models that you were working with, Pomme.
No, she wasn't modeling at the time. She produced my shows.
She produced your shows. So she produced the shows. So you've been working with her throughout this process, and so Pomme Goha was also doing our production for this performance as well.
Well, she wasn't producing this performance, she was doing the lighting. for it.
Lighting production,
Right,
yes.
lighting
I just wanted to
production.
make that footnote.
No, because that was a fashion catwalk where Pomme was very familiar with the format.
One of the other works is this one right here, in which you have faces, and that's
Right.
your face,
Yes.
right? And this is something that you've worked with before. But I want to kind of look at it through, I mean, art history is full
Yes.
of self-portraits on both sides of, the West, the East. It's like, everyone,
They're
right?
all narcissists.
Yeah, this is not about Western art history. It's across the world and across time, people have always produced self-portraits. But there's a relationship that people have to those portraits, so they are done in, they sort of manifest in different ways based on what the artist wants to say or the connections they want to make. So what is that self-portrait for you?
Ever since my trajectory began, ever since I started making sculpture, I call them objects because I'm kind of shy about the word sculpture, I've always done these. And for me, it's therapy. I'm not trying to say anything. I'm just trying to sort out my own demons. And I've always treated them as therapy. And I've always felt the need every year or every other year to do a work. And it's the closest I get to therapy. These are my most intimate works. And it is wonderful, Zarmeene, to chop your face up. To sit and get somebody else to take your face and chop it into many, many pieces. It is wonderful, and to reassemble it and to rework it, and there's such a cleansing, not cleansing, but just therapy. I don't know. There's release, release, which makes you think of Paris. But yes, there is a release. There is a definite release, and I have to do this every once, and even there's I have to do this. I have to do this, and the process was.
Yeah, no, actually, I think it's a brilliant insight into the catharsis that art practice can allow for artists. I think, you can that's why it keeps coming up, because you're sublimating yourself within the work, and whatever those demons or whatever they are, you can put them in this work, and you kind of cleanse yourself of them. They're out, and then they're there, and then perhaps I'm not an artist myself, but perhaps sometimes you look back at the work and you're like, wow, that was an intense time, or there was something going on at that time, and so it becomes, and it's incredibly intimate because it's almost like a diary or something, But it's to themselves. It's not really to us. So that's something that makes these works of Amin so intimate, and as he says, I mean. It's fascinating how for him it's an intense process. The face gets chopped up. It's not full. It's not whole there. It gets chopped up, but then it gets reassembled. And actually, in this work is a combination of two previous works. So this is one of the hands pieces that he's done. Another thread that goes throughout his trajectory, and I also think that is a form of self-portraiture for Amin, because this is being made with the hands, and the hands are going back into the work, and every hand is different, and just as every bit of chopped off face is different, but then they've been melded together to make this work that is both old and completely new. So you see, this is what I'm kind of talking about this quantum teleportation. We're moving between time, and then you have a completely new thing that comes from it.
There's the one at the UN, right? What was that called?
That was called Reaching for the Skies. The original title was Grasping for Air, but they thought that, number one, they found it a little disturbing, the work itself. And so they called it Reaching for the Skies. And actually he showed it at Washed Upon the Shore. Footnote.
I did, yeah. Okay, so I want to kind of come around to a different kind of conversation, which is you and I have worked together.
Yes.
You and Adam have worked together.
We all three have worked together.
We've all worked together. So it's we've worked together as co-curators.
Right.
I've also curated your work,
Right.
and so has Adam. So there's a kind of symbiotic relationship. Can you talk about this relationship a bit? So the relationship between an artist and a curator, and what it means to you in a larger context, but also because you and Adam have now been working together for some time, over a period of time with different exhibitions, different ways of working together. So two-part question. One is generally the relationship between the artist and the curator, and then maybe some insights from your working experience together.
Yeah, I've worked with both of you extensively. I've worked with you too extensively, Zarmeene Shah. And yeah, it's funny. It's a funny relationship between the artist and a curator. For me, they become like, the closest I can go to is my masseuse or my doctor. Both you fall in love with. You have to be in love with. You have to be in love with. Where there are no barriers. The doctor can touch you all over your body, and so can the masseuse. And so does the curator spiritually. Touch you all over your body. They feel you. You have to feel them. It has to be absolute, complete trust. And there has to be. And then you just become one. I remember when you were curating with me, and it's like, God, you make me want to, you make me want to sort of grasp more copper. I need to make more. I need to make more. It was this strange kind of I remember even telling you that very early on. And so that is the general relationship with the artist and the curator. And with Adam was wonderful because he curated me first in Chicago. And over there, it was a very, very ambitious show in a very large space, the South Asia Institute, run by Shireen and Afzal, who are the founders, Ahmed. And it was a very large space, and we envisioned a very ambitious show, but without an equally ambitious budget. So Adam really kicked in. And so other than this intellectual connection we had, he was there physically. Him and his two friends, Sam and Brian, were there physically putting together the show for me and working physically there. Adam once spent the entire night grinding MDA boards, which is super toxic, and he spent the whole night doing that. But it happened.
Yeah, times. No, I mean, working with Amin, as you very well know, and I think actually it's an intense experience, but there's a level, obviously, if you haven't worked with Amin, you're not going to also know how professional he is, actually. And for me, the last, it's how many years now? Six years. So last 6 years of working together pretty much constantly on it, more or less. It's been an education. And, it's not just, working with an artist. It's working with an artist who's very pakka, professional, and beyond that there's then the relationship of trust that develops and grows, and it's, for me, it's something that I value very deeply, and that's why I keep working with Amin, because if you get so much from that relationship, that's nothing to be sniffed at, and you have to really value these things in life. Honestly, I think it became clear to me when I was first doing my masters that I wanted to do something on Amin, and because he was the one, and also he was the one who convinced me to do a masters, which I'm grateful for. But I decided early on that I was going to do it on him, and then I spoke to him, and we thought maybe this can also turn into an exhibition. So then I got working on it, and it was a tough process. there's so much content within his trajectory, and again, I'm going to say it just to annoy him, a long trajectory, right? So yeah. So, but also there's some like you were one of my top sources, like cited sources, but there's not that much written about Amin or his work or his trajectory. So I thought, also I was thinking, you know, at least there will be some sort of documentation in the archives of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Even if no one ever looks it up, it's there, and they will be able to find it, and they'll be able to see it. And but then when I was writing the thesis, I thought it was very important that Amin's voice came through. So we did a series of interviews, which were difficult. It's difficult for Amin to talk about some of the stuff that we talked about, but these conversations just happened. And then I'd have one of these conversations, and then I'd been writing this a certain way for the whole time. Then we'd have this conversation, and I realized, okay, I've got to change up this whole thing. But it was a deep process, and then the exhibition in Chicago was a culmination of that. And I was really, really stoked to have been able to bring some of that energy back to Karachi, because this is where it started. Karachi Biennale 2017 is where our relationship began. And our relationship began in a professional sense, working together. And, you know, I think now that obviously we're very good friends, but we've still got that kind of energy and momentum to share with people, and great to bring it back to Karachi in this way.
Yeah, and I just want to add one thing is, you know, about the relationship between the curator and the artist. And for me, it is intimate. It is. And I remember when we did Washed Upon the Shore, which was inside this gallery, and you were curating me, Zarmeene, and you walked into my workshop, which as you know, I hate people coming inside my workshop. Hate it. And I don't know why you were inside my workshop, but for some reason, oh, did I? Okay, you insisted. Because, okay, fine. So that makes sense. And you walked inside my workshop, and at that point I was dealing with two moons, and you spotted this work of mine and said, there's the third moon. And you found me my third moon, which was already there under my nose. And then I did an installation around the third moon and a performance work. And, you know, those are magic moments. That, you know, whatever happens with posterity, it's the process, it's the now that's wonderful. And that's what you remember, moments like that, you know, those moments are just precious and wonderful.
Thank you.
Like on the process itself of curating and working with Amin, I like that hands-on thing. I mean, obviously he's in his I mean, you know, obviously, but he's got his workshop, which is a very sacred space, which I've only been in 2 or 3 times. I had to come in for this exhibition because I had to move that enormously heavy horn. So he needed me in there as part of the team, as one of the 7 guys lifting that. We got it in. And, you know, that's also a really exciting piece that I think is worth mentioning anyway. But actually, part of this curation of actually physically doing it, and like we did in Chicago, I mean, it was my 2 friends, Sam and Brian, and me, and neither of them are art people or do anything to do with curation or anything, but we had to put together the whole exhibition physically. There's no guys helping because this is the United States, you know, it's not Karachi. So, I mean, you know, labor costs, we're already doing this on a very small budget. So, you know, but if it is, you're actually getting physically, I'm now very familiar with this work, for instance. The 3 of us, and John, who's we're very grateful to have in the audience. We actually had to like physically lift it and get it out of the box, get it out of the crate, get it up. You know, all of this kind of stuff. And you know, it was an ambitious show, so there was a lot of like physicality to putting it all together. I love that. And you know, the process with my 2 friends, who I'm very, very grateful for, because they just did that, you know, for me, and out of love and Amin. And then you know, and with Amin, and then when we get into the space and we just bouncing ideas off each other, we're like, yeah, that works there, that works there. Oh, let's move that, let's change that up. That's fun. That's what I enjoy. So I mean, that when I get to work with Amin, why maybe the idea of curating with him, it is attracted to me because there is that physicality of the process. You have those moments and those organic moments like in the space. So yeah.
And you know, even he was talking about Brian and Sam, and then I wanted them to be part of my collaborative performance. So, you know, because they were there behind the scenes, but I wanted to use them because by that time you really get to know them. You really, really get to know them, and so they both were part of the performance work too. Kiss of the Spider Woman.
Each artist is different, each curator is different,
Right.
and each relationship kind of has to be negotiated, and the space has to be. It is an intimate space, and you kind of have to find your bearing in that.
Yes.
And I mean, I think that working as co-curators and working as a curator, as an artist, that dynamic changes things, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely.
Can you talk about that a bit? Like how, I mean, for me, I think you and I especially have a very explosive relationship when we work as co-curators.
Actually, you know what? No. What the behind the scenes होता है ना Johnny? But when we're working, no, but she's great. I mean, we've worked together where you have a lot of, because we both like cross-disciplinary kind of action, you know, spooky actions. We both like it. So you have these multitudes of people coming to you, especially when you're curating. And we're both sort of sitting there. And you know what's wonderful about Zarmeene? You look at her and you think, oh my God, this woman is in the box, but she's so not. You're so not. And that's truly joyful, you know, like to have, because sometimes it can be too rigid in the art scene. Everything's too defined. Everybody's too scared of you know, not looking serious. And I think to hell with it. To hell with it, and to, isn't it what it's all about? To expand boundaries, to test, to question.
But I think even within that conflict that we might have, it's because we have very strong opinions, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we, you know, we believe in those things. So coming back to that negotiating table, right? I mean, there are strong opinions and they need to be negotiated because you need to kind of find a common ground. And I think that happens both within the realm of curating and as an artist and curator kind of really. I mean, sometimes.
Say one thing. I have to, in what the contemporary kind of art world looks like at the moment, what I kind of see a lot is a very problematic relationship between artist and curator, especially when you're at the beginning of your trajectory, and then even well into your trajectory. I see these kind of power dynamics are a little bit off, because I mean, I not to sound basic, but frankly, without an artist, you don't have a job as a curator. There has to be an artist to be artist. You remember your position, and remember that actually you need to navigate this with the artist, and it's about bouncing ideas off each other. So, I mean, I really don't like it when I hear things, you know, about how prescriptive curators can be. You have to navigate this as a thing. Whereas when you're co-curating, there's the power dynamic there's less potential for that problematic thing, because you're in your idea studio together, whereas it tends to be that the artist is making the work themselves. It's a personal process. So you have to be careful how you navigate with the artist. But after 6 years with Amin, we have our ways of navigating around. So
and actually, Zarmeene, it's funny. Whatever issues we had, when you were curating me, it was soft as silk, Johnny. It was soft as silk. I was taken care of. I was nurtured and loved, you know what? And even when we were co-curating, we never had profound philosophical disagreements. They were always about something silly and petty, you know. And because we were so strung out with a ridiculously ambitious project with zero budget, put together with Scotch tape, which we always do. We were like fighting over really stupid stuff, but never the bigger picture. Never like how we wanted to be. You know, I remember we did Dreamscape, right? And then we had Hamid Rahim and Bilal come and do Soundscape. And just a few days before, there was the Peshawar tragedy. And everybody told us, are you going to cancel it? Are you going to Soundscape was basically, they brought down their speakers and they were going to mix music and do this great soundscape really loudly. And we said, no, we are not going to say no. This was terrorism, and that's what terrorists want, everything to halt and for us to be in fear. But both of us were exhausted at that time. And I just remember coming to Zarmeene and saying, it's so loud. And she said, yes.
This happened at another exhibition too. There was maybe the whole city was going to be shut down.
Yes.
There was Imran
burning.
Khan, something.
Something or the other, they were burning cars on.
Yeah. But we went ahead.
We went ahead.
Because the show must go on.
The show must go on.
Well, thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Amin and Adam. This has been lovely.
Thank you, Zarmeene Shah. It's a pleasure as always.
All right. Thank you. Take care. Dafis.
Ciao.